Hi, everyone. My name is Janet Morris, and I'm one of the IRB analysts at USC.
And my name's Heather Miller, and I'm a policy administrator here in the Human Research Protection Program at USC. And we're here today to help student researchers understand how to best fill out their IRB application. Janet,
Okay, so thank you, Heather. When you get started, you go over here and click on Create a New IRB Study. Press that button, and up this comes. So you're going to go through and complete all the sections that open in iStar. iStar is based on display logic, so certain buttons you pick are going to open up certain additional prompts. So just be sure when you go through, you don't leave anything blank because that could cause problems for you later. So we're doing a research protocol. We're going to enter the full study title, which is this for our example, and we'll use the same thing for a short title. Then you would go through and enter your abstract. I don't have anything prepared, but if you follow the prompt, it's 1 to 2 sentences on each of the following points. So not 1 to 2 sentences total. Is this a clinical trial? No, based on our example, it's social behavioral. It is not. I'm requesting review from the Social Behavioral IRB Board. This just gives you a little extra info to help you decide if you're unsure. And I'm going to say no, we do not have any financial or intellectual property interests. And I continue. Okay, on the next page is where you're going to add yourself, and you're going to add your faculty advisor. Click on Add. You should be able to find yourself when you click your name in. Got it. And your study role, my study role is going to be principal investigator. Okay, these questions are important for later on. Am I obtaining the consent? Yes. Even if it's an exempt study and we don't need signed consent, we're still informing people about what's expected of them. We're still getting their de facto consent, right, by giving an information sheet. And the PI's name is on that sheet, so the PI is the person collecting consent. And someone has to do it unless it's secondary data only. Am I going to interact or intervene with them? Yes, because I'm going to do an interview. And will I obtain identifiable information about the participants solely for the purposes of research? In the case of my example, yes.
And Janet, with your example, your plan is to interview in this scenario, you're going to be interviewing middle school teachers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to be asking them information about themselves just for the research study.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'll click OK. Now, if I had a faculty advisor, I would come in here and add that person. That would be my next step. If you're a student, you have to have a faculty advisor. So you'll just go through that same step, type their name here, answer the questions. Oftentimes, they are not going to be intervening or interacting. They're not collecting the data, right? They're just assisting you as your advisor. But you two can work that out with them. Down here is where you state if you are a student or a staff member. So again, it is required that you reveal that. And if you are a student, you must have a faculty advisor. So it's gonna make me enter someone. So I'll just put my boss.
So in this case, the student who's doing the research, the doctoral student, which is you are the principal investigator, and your faculty is going to be the faculty advisor. Is that correct?
Right. It's usually your dissertation chair, but it can be someone on the committee or, whatever you guys have set up. But I do have to have a faculty advisor when the answer is yes to 2.2.
Thank you.
Okay, so for this study, it's asking who has reviewed it for scientific merit. In my case, I am pretending to be a doctoral student, so I'm going to pick the doctoral dissertation committee. It's also acceptable to say none if nobody has overseen it, or if you have funding, for example, federal funding, you need to click that they have overseen it. So whatever is appropriate for you. Next up is funding. I'm going to say no funding, but you should say whatever is appropriate for you. An urgent review. We do have guidelines on our website what constitutes an urgent review. So there are a few situations, such as when the funding agency requires IRB review within a certain time frame, or they won't release the money. Also, if the study is collecting information that has a finite or ephemeral window, right? You've only got 2 weeks to do it, and you need it approved within that time. But that doesn't mean because you were late in submitting. It means if there are circumstances outside your control, we will consider it for urgent review. But I'm going to say no because most would not be. Okay, so the type of study review, this is a thing that can be kind of difficult, and you should discuss with your advisor to come up with the best plan, and you can visit our website to see examples. It'll help you make that determination. I'm going to say this is exempt. So exempt is the lowest risk, and many student studies can qualify as exempt. If you're not sure, you could go up to expedited. Ultimately, the decision is that of the IRB. So whatever you pick, if you're wrong, we're going to correct it. But you should just have sort of a starting point. And again, because of the way iStar works, the higher up you go, the more sections open up for you in iStar, which isn't to say you should minimize it. You should think about what you've got in advance so you give us the most complete picture. But I think mine can qualify as exempt.
Okay, and I'd like to speak to this for just a second. So an exempt review would be anything that would constitute, like if you were going to be doing an interview or a focus group or a survey, and you weren't asking sensitive questions, meaning questions that would make somebody feel upset. Like, for example, suicidal ideations, those are sensitive questions. If you're asking somebody about their experiences doing something that happens in everyday life, and you've discussed it with your advisor, exempt reviews are where most of our student reviews focus on. And this is why we're using this as the choice for this video.
Right. And one other important thing I would add is that if your study requires signed consent, such as if you are using minors and a parental consent is required, then you can't do exempt. So just consider there are a few times when it might seem exempt to you, but it's not going to be because of where you hit with the regulations or with USC's policy. But your analyst can help you with that. This next section is really important. If you don't submit a protocol, it's not going to pass in iStar, and you're not going to actually be able to submit. So a protocol is where you describe the study in a big picture way. We're going to ask you to use templates that we've uploaded on our website. And I don't have one prepared for this example, but to add it, I would click here, and then it's going to ask me to choose the file I want to upload, and it'll complete that section. If you had a sponsor, say a foundation or a federal sponsor or something like that, that is asking you to use an informed consent other than USC's, you would add it here. Otherwise, that can be blank. If perchance you've given us study documents that are password protected, please enter the password, because otherwise we can't access it. We can't begin the review. Probably best to just not password. Next question has to do with study locations. Seems like it's pretty straightforward, but where some people get into trouble is when they're doing a remote study. So if you're doing a remote study, it might seem smart to you to click other, but it really isn't other. It's the campus where the study originates. So if you're on University Park, say you're a sociology student, this is what you're going to click. Okay, so it's on any University Park associated location. The reason I don't want you clicking other is because when you click other, it starts asking about what the other sites are doing. And when it's something like Zoom, that's a service. It's not another site. Okay, so we'll stick with this answer and continue. So again, in this case, you can say campus location or you can say off-campus location, but if it is Zoom, you could easily click off-campus there and then type remote Zoom or whatever it is, whatever you're using. Next up is methods. Okay, so this is a big determining factor for how the rest of iStar feeds you, what prompts it provides. We've already said we're going to interview the middle school teachers. So I definitely want this first one. The study procedures involve interactions or interventions with participants. Okay. Also, in my imaginary study, we are going to ask for information from the school district about students, well, the aggregate of disciplinary actions that have happened by month is the way our imaginary study goes. So in that case, I would use secondary analysis of data that has been collected for non-research purposes, because the school's disciplinary records, student records, were not collected for research. They were collected to run the school and for the student's history. So I'm going to click that one as well. In study procedures, I'm going to come through and I'm going to check interviews because that's my plan. And nothing else comes up in here. Secondary data comes up later. So you've just indicated that that section should open later.
Should I click also audio or video recording if I want to go ahead and record my Zoom?
Yep. If you're going to do Zoom and you're going to record it, you click
Perfect.
this, whether it's audio or video. Okay. We're not going to need laboratory letter. We don't need radiation safety. A lot of this doesn't apply because, it's built for in case you had checked blood collection or something like that. So just look at it rationally and see, does this apply to me? If it doesn't, skip it. Let's see. This is where the secondary data comes into play. And sometimes that's a little hard to understand. I mean, it's not titled secondary data, but you're collecting data from another source. You are not collecting data from deceased individuals, in this case, their children. If somebody happens to be deceased, that's outside the point. You're not actively seeking information on deceased people. So I guess I clicked the wrong one. No. This asks you to upload a copy of the data collection sheet. Heather, we're not using that now, correct?
Correct.
We're not requiring that.
So yeah, if it's, and you can see it's not forced.
It's not forced, right? If you have something you want to upload, you can, if you have a data collection sheet, but we're not going to force you to do it at this point. Will you be obtaining data from a clinical data warehouse? This is something to do with medical research studies. So in your case, no, you're going to be getting the data from the district. So your answer here is no. This wants to know how you're going to collect the records and specimens and how they will be analyzed. You're going to request student information from the district. When you get student records, FERPA applies. So that's something else you can look up on our website. You would have to get permission from the FERPA officer. Let's see, district will reply. At the district, yeah.
So it's important here to have a plan as you're filling out your IRB application to make sure you actually know how you're going to be getting it. This should be outlined in your proposal prior, or in the appendices of your proposal, or working out with your faculty advisor prior to filling out the IRB application.
So let's see, I don't really know because I'm making some of this up. I think that the district will de-identify, ignore my spelling.
The data.
So you will have no access. Something like that. Okay, here's where you're going to upload your interview script. So these are the questions you're going to be asking. If it's okay for it to be semi-structured, you don't have to have every single question. You can have prompts, open-ended questions, but we want to see the general direction you're going. And that's the most important thing. So we know that the main topic that you are asking is about, let's see, in ours, it had to do something with gender, let's see, disciplinary action each week faced by student gender. So your questions are going to be about that. They're not going to be about the teacher's recreational drug use, right? There's something, it has to be something that applies. So upload your questions there. Special subject populations. In this case, employment as a middle school teacher is an inclusion requirement, right? All of your participants must be employed as middle school teachers. So we need you to check employees or students. They're not necessarily your employees or students, but these people are employed, and that has some special considerations since the employment is what determines their eligibility. When you click that, it's now going to ask, how will you minimize the potential for them to feel coerced to participate? And chiefly, what we're looking for is this next one. Does anyone on the study team have a supervisory relationship over the potential research subjects? So say you're the principal and you're interviewing the teachers at your school. In that case, yes, you have some kind of a supervisory relationship. And then that, as you see, triggers something, and iStar will ask you to explain. But assuming you don't, you'll state participation is voluntary. Something like that, right? It's voluntary. They can withdraw at any time. So and you do not have any kind of supervisory relationship over them. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one, financial obligation and compensation. It's important that there's no cost to participants. And then you don't have to compensate them, but if you are going to compensate them, we want to know what you're doing. So since there was no funder, remember the study had no funding, there's no sponsor or funding agency to cover costs. We're not going to put responsibility onto participants. So the correct answer here for most student studies would be there are no costs. And look, it filled this part in for you. Down here, you describe your payment. Maybe you're going to give people a $15 Starbucks gift card for their participation, which is expected to last about an hour. Minimum wage is around $15, so that would be appropriate. Another thing you can do is state that if you're going to prorate it, if they quit early, are you prorating it? If they quit early, are you still giving them the entire $15? Something like that needs to be explained. Another option is that you don't pay someone monetarily directly, but you enter them into a drawing. So you could add that instead. No direct compensation, but opportunity to enter a drawing. For a gift card, whatever applies. You tell us, and we'll tell you if there's any reason why it's not acceptable. Many student studies are not funded. In that case, you simply state that no compensation will be offered. Okay, so this page looks kind of daunting. This is about participant privacy and data confidentiality. So it's pretty clear if you just read it. Research procedures will be conducted in person in a private setting. Probably, but maybe not. Maybe you're meeting in a coffee shop. I mean, just, think about where you're doing it.
If I'm doing it on Zoom, how would I do it? I would say that the research procedures would be in a private setting because I'm in one area that's private and they're in one area that's private.
I would pick the second one because it's not conducted in person, but It will be captured and reviewed in a private setting. You can click, I was highlighting this, you can check all that apply because maybe you have more than one way of collecting data. Maybe some people will be online, some, so pay attention, you can answer more than one, but I would click this. Confidentiality, it's asking how the data is going to be labeled. So in this case, we're probably going to have more than one because when you do the interviews, it's either going to be identifiable if you're recording. If you record, it has to be identifiable at the time, but then you can turn around and code it. So this is a little tricky. The data that you get from the school district is not going to be identified. Okay, so for our researcher, The data from the school district is anonymous, even though the district knows who is who, we don't. So I would click anonymous for that. And then I think I would say coded. So I'm going to interview people and I know their names, but I'm going to turn around and assign them a pseudonym to protect their privacy. The pseudonym is the code. And I do have a link that ties it back. So I know that Heather Miller, the pseudonym of Heather Miller is really Janet Morris. I know that, but it's not easily accessible, right? It's nothing that if someone stumbled upon it, they would think it's Heather Miller, not knowing it's Janet Morris. So you've got two things. So I would say here, interviews will be coded and secondary data will be anonymous. You probably want to give a little more explanation, but.
And another thing that might be familiar to students is that interviews will be de-identified. So when you have like a qualitative study, the way that you would read it in the literature is that you're going to de-identify data. So confidential data, meaning you've interviewed somebody, so you know who they are. They're not anonymous, you know who they are, but then you go home and you de-identify it. In this IRB application, it's written as coded, which is regulatory, I would call it regulatory jargon, just to make sure that you're clear that this is for the regulations that which the IRB analysts need. But to put it into research context, when you interview somebody, you go home, you de-identify that person, the transcripts will be de-identified, you might assign a number or a pseudonym, and that is considered coded.
Right. Because sometimes researchers say they're going to anonymize it. You can't anonymize it. Once you know it from an IRB standpoint. So that's what we're trying to get at. It's de-identified, which in this case is confidential or coded. But the stuff you got from the district can be anonymous because you personally as a researcher have no way of figuring that out. And how you're going to store it. Most people nowadays pick just electronic, but sometimes people also store physically and you can check more than one. So if you've got electronic, then it's going to ask you where you're storing it. So just answer whatever's true. I'm going to put it on my local laptop and I'm going to put it on my local server. Okay. If you pick external servers, it's going to ask you to name them. And then it's going to be your responsibility to ensure that whatever third party you use meets or exceeds the minimum standards set out by USC ITS. So that's on you. And then at a minimum, you are supposed to confirm that the following measures will be taken and enforced. So it's really looking for you to answer all of them, but be honest, don't answer something that you don't intend to do. So if you don't have security software or you're not going to scan regularly, don't say it. Just say what you're going to do. But this is an expectation we would like to see you do. We get down to other measures. So you've audio or video recorded your interviews here. Are you going to transcribe them and then destroy them? That's a pretty common answer. But you can also modify them so that people cannot be identified. And that's a good practice to do too. So just do whichever one you and your advisor have agreed is the best choice for this study. It's asking if identified data or specimens will be sent outside the institution to a third party. Note that if you're using an outside translation service, that doesn't count. So the answer would still be no. You would only answer yes if it's a sponsor, a federal agency, or another institution. And if it's another institution, then we'd get into something separate where you need a data transfer agreement that you get through the USC Stevens Center. So that's another topic that's outside iStar. But most people for student studies, the answer is no. And then we get down to what happens with the research data at the conclusion of the study. So after you're done with the study, after your data analysis, a best practice really is to destroy your direct identifiers and that key to the code. Remember the key that linked the pseudonym to the real name. You would destroy it because you probably don't have any other need for it. But maybe you do. So if you do, don't say you're going to destroy it. You're going to retain everything for future use. But note that that's something you can do anyhow. You can destroy the identifiers and still keep the de-identified data for your future use. So that's up to you. Again, whatever applies, check all that apply. Some things don't apply to you. If your study is not funded by NIH, You don't need to worry about NIH, the National Institute of Health. If you don't have FDA regulations, you don't need it. So only pick the things that apply to you. Then we're going to go on. HIPAA. Okay, HIPAA shows up, and that's the Health Information Privacy Act. Heather, I don't, something like that.
Portability,
So,
yeah.
Portability Act. So, you know, when you go to the doctor and they make you sign a form about, do you release your records? That's what this is. And in this study that we're using as an example, this doesn't apply. But it confuses people sometimes because you might say, oh, yes, I am collecting names. I am collecting street addresses, but you're not collecting it through someone's protected health information, such as their medical records. So for our study example, the answer is no. If I were to answer yes, a whole bunch of new questions come up and it'll confuse you if your study doesn't use HIPAA. So most likely it's no. So conflict of interest. This is looking for whether someone on the study team has potential financial conflict of interest. So say I owned a business and I was doing some research on my employees, and maybe the way the research turns out affects me financially, right? It's generally no for a student study. So we're not going to click. If we were to click, we would disclose it through a different system that's outside of iStar. Okay, so that's something else called disclose. In our case, we're going to skip it. And we hit additional supporting documents. So the IRB has recently started asking exempt studies to upload an information sheet sample here. We have templates for information sheets on our website. You would complete the information sheet and you would add it here. You're just going to title it information sheet, right? Put it up and we're going to review it. And then that's it. Anything else you want to describe, if there's anything that you feel like is important and we need to know, you can add it in here in these comments. And then you get down to the end and it tells you, are you ready to submit? You've reached the end. You make sure that everything is completed. It's going to stop you if it isn't. iStar should bounce it back. And if it does somehow let you go through and you're missing things, then later your analyst will come back and say, hey, you're missing this. I don't want to hit submit because mine's fake and incomplete, but see, that wasn't too painful. Heather, do you have anything to add?
No, we are going to also include information regarding the protocol that you would have uploaded that Janet showed earlier in the video, and also where the information sheet is on our website. And thank you so much, Janet.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone. Good luck.